You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
Hi, everyone. So good to be back for another episode, and I'm very excited about today's guest. But before we introduce him to the show, Rachel, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about today's sponsor and then introduce him to our listeners?
Yes. So today's podcast is powered by the National Fire Sprinkler Association. NFSA aims to protect lives and property through the advancement of fire sprinklers. You can learn more about fire sprinklers, fire advocacy, and how to get involved by visiting their website at www.nfsa.org. So without further ado, I'm so excited to have today's guest on. He is a friend of both mine and Amber, so I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about. But our guest today is Dennis Gardin, who was burned over 70% of his body in a horrific gasoline explosion as a child, resulting in extensive hospitalization, dozens of surgeries, and years of therapy and rehabilitation. Prolonged pain and profound disfigurement caused him to hide in isolation for years in the confines of his parents' home. But he never gave up. Dennis has grown along his journey of self-discovery to become a successful businessman, professional speaker, ministrant, former television talk show host, and radio personality. He is currently privileged with the honor of serving as the executive director for the Georgia Firefighters Burn Foundation. He hopes to inspire individuals to face their inner scars and self-limiting beliefs to begin creating an abundant, fulfilling life of purpose. Welcome, Dennis.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me, Rachel, Amber. I'm really jazzed to be here today. Yeah,
We're so happy to have you. You always bring so much joy to whatever room you're in. So we're very happy to have you here.
You know, and I would agree with that. I like to think when I walk into a room, I own it.
You do. You sure do, Dennis.
Yes.
But it definitely was not always that way, though. It was not.
Well, Dennis, on that topic, I know Rachel shared a little bit about the burn injury that you had in the bio, but I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about your burn injury and in your own words and kind of just speak to that journey as a survivor.
Okay. Well, I was burned in a gasoline explosion as a 14-year-old, but I have to preface that by saying I was a brilliant 14-year-old, and I certainly knew more than my parents did.
As all teenagers do.
As all teenagers do, and I was so much smarter than them, and my motorcycle needed repairs, and my parents were taking too long to put it in the shop. They actually weren't, but anything that doesn't happen right now with the teenagers taking too long. And I got a couple of friends to help me sneak the bike out of the garage into the basement so that we can work on it without anyone knowing what we were doing. And none of those little boys realized how close we were to the furnace and the hot water heater. So the four of us went to closed-in space, gasoline, building up of fumes, open flame under the hot water tank. It was a design for disaster. And we spilled gasoline, ran under the hot water tank, and it exploded. And I received burns over 70% of my body and spent 8 months in a hospital with over 50 surgeries. And I had a 13-year-old friend that received a 20% burn, and he was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And it was a very different experience. And I actually, my first 3 weeks in the hospital, I was in a coma and on life support. And when I came out of the coma, my friend wasn't there with me, and I thought he had died in the fire. And what I didn't know was after they took us to an emergency room, he was transferred to the children's hospital, but I was too unstable to be transferred anywhere. And actually, at the time, the doctor said that I was not going to survive. So it didn't really matter which hospital I died in. and they wanted to provide comfort care for me. But my parents, being of strong, strong faith, they insisted as long as there was breath in my body, they insisted that they work on me and do all they could. And, I'm so very thankful for having faithful parents and insisted. And it was the beginning. That 3-week coma was the beginning of an 8-month hospital journey. And it was a very foreign environment for me because I went from playing baseball that morning to being in a hospital emergency room that afternoon. And life can change just that soon. It can turn in a second, those defining moments in our life.
Sounds like your parents are strong people, though.
Very strong. And actually, I didn't hear the term burn survivor, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I'd never heard the term burn survivor until I attended my first world burn. I was always a burn victim, and being in the hospital 8 months and having over 50 surgeries. And back then, the burn center was really a ward. It was one room, 10 or 12 beds in the room, and it was unisex. Males and females were all there. And as a 14-year-old, I saw a lot of things that a 14-year-old probably didn't need to see or hear. And what was most frightening for me is to hear adults screaming and crying like little kids. I didn't know adults did that. If a kid falls and scrapes his knee, he cries and runs home to mom. But adults, if they fall and skin their knee, they're cursing and swearing. And I didn't know adults cried like that. And just to hear the sound of that, it was horrifying, actually.
It's traumatizing.
Horrifying. Yeah. And if these adults can't handle it, what is this little kid? Now I'm a little kid again. What is this kid supposed to do? Yeah. It was different. And I don't think that, I don't know many burn survivors that ever anticipated it happening, because I could never imagine this happening. And I didn't know this world even existed, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we hear that all the time, is that, you don't really know about the burn survivor community until you are a burn survivor or a loved one has been impacted by a burn. And it's the pain and, not just the physical pain, but the mental and emotional pain are, I mean, I don't think anyone's ever prepared for, whether it's a burn or really any big trauma. You can't ever be fully prepared for it.
No, you can't, Rachel. And for me, I didn't think that life could get any worse than that hospital stay and that painful surgery. And it was a teaching hospital as well. And sometimes when the other patients were treated, sometimes the curtains got pulled, sometimes the curtains didn't get pulled. And it was just really, it couldn't get any worse than that until I was discharged. And after 8 months, I was discharged home. And I thought I was kicked out because I thought discharge meant you were fixed. And they were sending me home still fully bandaged. The only part of my body that wasn't bandaged were my feet. And I went home still bandaged, still needing dressing changes 3 times a day. So I wasn't fixed. So in my mind, after 8 months, they kicked me out. And I could not blame them because there was so much effort put into taking care of me. I couldn't blame them for getting tired of me, despite how sweet I was. But I after 8 months, I went home and I hid in the house for 2 years. I would not come outside because I was so ashamed of my appearance. I mean, when I say hid in the house, I only left the house for doctor's appointments or clinic appointments. I hid in the house for 2 years. And what was difficult about that is seeing what it did to my family. Because when I was in the hospital, they could be a part of that. My mother would help with my dressing changes. She'd help with the debridement procedures. They could read to me. They could feed me. And once I was home and was ashamed to go out, it was the first time I saw them helpless. And that was very, very difficult for me to see that. And and as I said earlier, my family, I was raised in the church. I mean, you could be sick all week and not go to school, but on Sunday you're getting your butt up and you're going to church. I mean, that was just the environment. And our tradition in my family was always to gather for prayer at the end of the day. I mean, we would pray and give thanks for whatever happened that day, and we would pray and give thanks for whatever tomorrow would bring. That's just what we did. And while I was still hiding in the house, I had to participate in those prayers. So I saw nothing to be thankful for. But I would participate in those prayers, giving thanks. And then when I'd go to my room before I went to bed, I would get on my knees and pray to God, let this be the night that I die in my sleep. Because if I die in my sleep, that was the only release I saw from this living hell I was going through. And it's a different kind of experience to have your heart broken because of the sunrise. And I would see something and say, wow, another day I'd had to experience this. And then I felt like I was being deceitful to my parents, praying and giving thanks with them. But my secret prayers would just let me die. And I think it's important to make the distinction between wanting to die and suicidal ideation. Those are two entirely different things. And I think people often confuse them as being the same. I never wanted to kill myself, but I wanted to be freed of this hell I was going through. Yeah. And I did that for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And, I think everyone, burn survivor or not, can relate to that. We all go through tough times. Life isn't a breeze. If only it could be. So, you talk about how you kind of hid away for 2 years. What eventually helped you get out of the house and change your mindset?
Well, what happened, ladies, is that, and I can really look at the times that I had the most forward movement in my life and my journey were the times I wasn't focused on me. I was focused on someone else. And with all the care I received, because my hands were so badly damaged, they were going to amputate. And I was so afraid that my parents were going to agree with that because they were afraid about infection. And if I got infection, blah, blah, blah. And I had to be cared for. I had to be bathed. I had to be fed. Now I'm a teenager and I had to use a bedpan. And I won't say it's different at any age, but as a teenager, when we think that we have control over the world, it was just so I would eat less than I needed to, because the less I ate, the less I would poop. That was my philosophy. But, recovering from a burn injury, we have to be on a high calorie diet. And I was doing the exact opposite. But with people doing all of this for me, feeding me, bathing me, reading to me, cleaning me up after being on the bedpan, if they're doing all of this for me and all they wanted was for me to be okay, that's all they wanted. So I decided if I went back to high school for my senior year of high school and graduated like normal kids, which I don't know if you can use normal and kids in the same sentence, but if I could graduate like normal kids, then somehow I could pretend or convince my family that I was okay, and that would be my gift to them. And so it wasn't that I saw that I needed school for my future, because I really didn't see a future, but what could I give back? And I had nothing to give other than the pretense of being okay. And I promised myself, no matter how difficult it would be, I would never let anyone see me cry. And I was afraid, but my desire for this gift to my family was stronger than my fear of going back. And sometimes you hear the term, well, sometimes the things we anticipate is worse than the actual thing. Well, this wasn't one of those cases. Because as difficult as I imagined it being, it was far more difficult than that. It was. The first time I sat in the lunchroom, I sat in a chair next to a young girl that jumped up and screamed, "How dare you come in this lunchroom and spoil everyone's appetite?" And I wasn't angry at her. I wanted to apologize to her, because maybe the way I look, I was spoiling everyone's appetite. And I decided to substitute lunch for study hall. And just those things, and the things that people would say. And I would get home with my my mom waiting on pins and needles. Just, oh man, how was today? And I would muster up this smile when I walk in the front door, and I would immediately rush to the bathroom because that was the only door in our house that had a lock on it. And I can go in the bathroom and cry without anyone walking in on me. And some days when I couldn't make it home, I would sit in the alley behind our garage and just bawl my eyes out and pull myself together before I walked in the door, because I was focused. I was focused on getting this diploma, no matter how difficult it was for me. And even the teachers, I mean, they didn't know how to handle this situation. And, this is 50 some years ago. And they would sit me in back of the class, and they were trying to be supportive of me so that people wouldn't stare at me. And they sit me in back of the class. They let me leave class 5 minutes early to get to my next class before the hallways got crowded. So I'm hiding in the house because I feel different. I go back to school, and now I'm treated different, which really confirms that I am different. And I decided, I said, well, I can't hide. The more I try to hide, the more attention I'm drawing to myself. So I just put myself all the way out there. I mean, I went to all the extracurricular events. I went to all the baseball games, the basketball games. I even ran for class president, came in runner up for senior class president, and graduated at the top of my class. And I want to pause right here to give you guys time to applaud for that. I graduated at the top of my class.
That's amazing.
Not impressed, huh? Okay.
No, that's very impressive.
Hard crowd. I remember getting that diploma, and when I walked across that stage, I mean, all of my family, all of neighbors and relatives were there, and they cheered so loud when I got that diploma. And I gave it to my mom, and I remember my grandmother immediately snatching it from her. But it was mission accomplished. But I didn't feel good about it very long, because it's like, now what? I can't go back. I didn't think any further than that diploma. It's like, now what do I do? I can't hide back in the house because I've been out here for so long. What do I do now? And again, panic set in. But it gave me an opportunity, because I was focused on someone else. It really benefited me, because I had no need to go back in hiding now. I didn't know what the future held for me, but hiding away wasn't part of it, because I had moved past it, because I was focused on someone else. And then I went on to college and, got the job and got married and had kids and blah, 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 got divorced, all of that stuff. But really began putting together what I call a success package. I want to do all the things that, I'm doing air quotes, all the things that normal people did. So I wanted to get the good education. I wanted to get the good job. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have the house, the dog, the white picket fence. I wanted all of that stuff. And I acquired all of that. And I don't say it as though I'm bragging. I mean, I even was a radio announcer for a while, and had a
That's why you
television
sound so
talk
good on the
show.
podcast.
I mean, it was. Is that why I sound so good on the podcast? Well,
it's that radio voice.
And the television, and believe it or not, and I think this podcast is a good place to be transparent, because I did have a future in radio. I was a voice, and I was doing my thing with burn incense in the studio, and was really making love to people's ears through the radio, and had gotten quite a following. And people would want to meet me, or they would invite me to MC programs, and I would refuse everything because I didn't have time. And I really began to stress about that, because people would want to date me. They would want to come visit me. They would try to describe what I looked like. And I just felt that I was being a fraud, because the voice did not match the face. And I said, man, am I on radio because I enjoy it, or am I on radio because I'm hiding still? And I didn't. So I left radio. I left radio because of that. And I don't know if it was true or not. I still can't answer it today, but I can look back on it, and today I can very clearly know that it played some part in that. Really low, and I'm still trying to find normal. I'm still trying to find that detour to normal, and have gone on to do a lot of amazing things. Owned a couple of businesses, successful, some not, and owned a couple of retail establishments in Detroit, and did did all of this stuff. And I don't say it to be bragging. This is it's my testimony. It's what it is. It's my testimony, and I don't try to impress my beliefs on anyone else. But to God be the glory to my life's journey, and I recognize that because He is the head of my life. But all I really wanted, ladies, all I really wanted was to walk into a room and not be noticed. That was all. That was all I wanted, and it didn't matter how much success I accumulated. I could not ignore the fact that I was burned because it was a part of my experience and it was a part of who I am. So I didn't like that. And no matter how much success or how many things I did or accumulated, it wasn't going to make that disappear, and it even impacted my marriage. And it took me a while to realize that. And maybe I'm giving some long answers to a short question. I don't know.
No, you're not. I do want to know though, Dennis. So there was that time, right, where you said you just kind of did what you wanted to please everyone in your family. At what point did it become, okay, I'm no longer the victim to this, right? And even if you didn't use that word, what point did it become like, I'm doing this because I want to do it?
That's a good question. And that segues right into me stumbling into the burn community, because I didn't know there was one. I wasn't looking for one because I didn't know there was one. And I had gone on with my life. Like I said, I've done all these amazing things and was married. I was divorced. And at the time, I owned a music store. I did independent music retail in Detroit. And I was at my store one day, and none of the staff had come in yet, because our staff didn't usually come in until around 3, because we didn't really get business until after people got out of school and got off work. And I was there one day, and it was extremely busy. And I'm trying to take care of customers and make sure people aren't stealing anything. And I'm doing this stuff. And the telephone rang. And it was a friend of mine who I used to work with. And her uncle had gotten burned. And he was in the hospital, and they couldn't bring him out of his depression. So in desperation, she called me and asked me to go talk to him. And I told her yes, and hung up without really thinking about it, because I'm busy. And as soon as I hung the phone up, panic set in, because I had never talked or seen another burned person. And I got angry with her, because what right did she have to ask me that? Even though it's obvious I'm burned, and all the years we worked together, I never talked about it. I mean, up to this point, we're at 20 years post-burn now. And I still have not had a conversation about it, and not even with my family, not with my wife, my kids, no one. And here she was asking me. And I used to say I had to go because I told her I would. But the reality is I need to own that. And the reality is I could have just not went. But I did go because I chose to go. And man, I went to the burn center, and in the hospital I was in, the building was torn down. So this was the new burn center in the new building. And I paced back and forth in the lobby. Am I going to go? Am I not going to go? Am I going to go? I took a deep breath, and I went up to visit with this gentleman, and I don't remember his name. If he was on this podcast right now, I wouldn't even recognize him. But I sat and I talked with this gentleman for a couple of hours. And as I was leaving, he told me how much he really appreciated the conversation and connecting with someone who had gone through this and had gotten on with their life. And he said, Dennis, I think I'm going to be okay. And I just appreciate you coming to talk with me, and thank the support group for sending you. And I was like, what the hell is he talking about? And I went to the nurse's station, and they had some brochures on the counter of a support group that was happening the first Monday of every month. And it was less than 3 miles from my place of business, and I had no idea. It was the Burns United Support Group, which is still functioning in Detroit, and I had no idea. But I'm confused too, because when I left, it was the first time I attached anything positive to this injury. I say, wow, he said it helped him. And I'm trying to process all of this. And I called the support group. And Donna Schneck, who ran the support group, she invited me to come. I told her I would, but I was busy, couldn't make it. But I would call her and apologize. And she said, no, Dennis, don't worry about it. We'll see you next month. And we talked for about 10 minutes. The next month, I was busy, and I need to do air quotes. I was busy and couldn't make it. And then I would call her and apologize. And she never pressed the issue. She said, that's okay, next month. And then we talked for about 10 minutes. And we did this dance for about 4 or 5 months. And 1 month, I actually went. To the support group. And when I walked in that church, it was in the church lobby area, which where it was held at. When I walked in, there were 8 or 9 burn survivors sitting in a circle. And man, I believe I almost fainted because this was not what I expected. This was more than I even knew was possible. And it was bittersweet because I had found people that understood, but it also said that there are other people that suffered just like me. So, it was good and bad, sweet and sour. And believe it or not, as they were introducing themselves, when it got to me, I opened my mouth, and before I could even get my name out, I just started bawling like a baby. And they allowed me to. They allowed me that space. And I just bawled like a baby. But it also was the meeting where they were making travel plans to attend World Burn Congress.
Oh my gosh.
Which was the following month. And they invited me, and I'm like, hell no. I think because I'm trying to process being in a room with this 8 or 9
people.
I'm definitely not going somewhere where you're telling me there are more people that actually get. And I was like, no, I'm not. No, that this is too much for me, all too fast. And I also was working. In the mornings, I was working in an office assisting a public speaker. This guy called Les Brown. He's a motivational speaker, world-renowned speaker now, but he was getting there then. And I went into the office, and do you guys want to know what happened to me? And everybody was, yeah. So everybody's pulling their chairs together in the outer office, and I'm just sharing with them and bawling because I can't stop talking about it now that the door was cracked.
Yep.
And I was telling them about it, and they said, Dennis, you should go to that conference. I said, no. I told them I wasn't going to go. And the following week, when I came into the office, they had pooled their money together. Wow. They got in touch with the support group. They registered me. They bought me a plane ticket, and they paid for my hotel and had it sitting on my desk.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I told you guys I wasn't going to go. And they said, Dennis, we spent this money on you. You can't make this space. Now you have to go. And I went. I went to World Burn only a month after going to my first support group. And
that's amazing.
I won't say who was in the group that with me, but there was a fellow it was his first time going to World Burn. And he and I sat on the back of that plane. I would buy him a nervous shot of liquor. He would buy me a nervous shot, and we were buying each other shots of liquor. And by the time we got to the destination, we were pretty toasted. I'd have to say that we were pretty toasted. And attending that World Burn, I walked into that hotel, and I see all of these burn people, and I was hyperventilating, and I checked into the hotel. Went up to my hotel room and just started crying. I said, I'm going to sit in this hotel room until it's time to go back to Detroit. I said, because I can't handle this. I'm just going to do room service. I can't handle this. And that internal dialogue that we have, we can encourage ourselves or we can discourage ourselves. And we're very skilled at doing both as people. I think somebody said earlier, none of this is unique to Burns. It's just when we have these challenges in life, what do we do with it? How does it manifest itself in how we operate? And I went back downstairs. I had left something at the front desk and they called me and I had to go back down and get it. And I went down and I was standing in the corner behind some chairs and I wasn't even aware of it. And some burn survivors approached me. You know how World Burn is. We're all family here and blah, 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 blah. We hugging everybody. It's like, I don't want to say shit on this podcast, but I'm like, oh.
You can say shit.
Yeah, this is all happening too much. Who are these people? And they don't understand it. Mine has to be different, and my story and my experience was not unique. And there was some solace I found in that. And back then, World Burn was, I think it was around 100 people attending back then. And I was introduced to Alan and Delwyn Breslow. And Alan was, it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. I say, he is totally insane. And I grew to understand what that meant, but it was so, I don't even know the word to say, but I had found my tribe. This was my family. This was my village. There was a community of people who understood. Because so often I heard growing up, I know exactly how you feel. It's like, well, if you've not been burned, no, you don't. Or everything is going to be all right. And, what I always wanted to respond, and I didn't because I was a kid, I wanted to respond, how the hell do you know it's going to be all right? How do you know that? And we tend to toss these very flowery platitudes around to be supportive, but sometimes they can come off so disingenuous that you just go, ugh. And because people were saying things that weren't honest, it didn't allow me to be honest with them. It would have meant the world to me if somebody had approached me and said, Dennis, I can't imagine what you're going through. I can't even imagine. I don't even know what to do for you, but I'm here. That would have been honest. And then that would have given me license to be honest with that person, because people were saying what they thought I wanted to hear. And I, in turn, was acting and saying what I thought they wanted to hear. Because for a long time, because anyone that knows me, if you ask me how I'm doing, I would tell you I am excellent and getting better all the time. But for years and years and years, I would say that I did not mean it. I did not mean it, But when I say it, I'm not just responding to you, but I'm also talking to myself. So if 20 people ask me how I'm doing and I respond excellent and getting better, they may have heard it one time, but I heard it 20 times. And that's important for me to constantly talk to myself and move through that. And actually with World Burn, I think I had been to 2 World Burns, and it was going to be hosted in Detroit. And I'd been to 1, and it was going to be hosted in Detroit. And some things happened with the coordinator there. So Alan Breslow just tossed it to me. I said, well, I've only been to 1. What are you doing? And of course I said yes, because I didn't know how to say no. And so my second World Burn was actually the one I hosted in Detroit. And I've done concert promotions and event planning and that stuff through my music business. So I just modeled it after that. And it was quite the experience. Attending World Burn was overwhelming, actually. And I still hear people say that now, that it's just so much to take in. And it's only a couple of days. And by the time my feet landed on the ground, it was time to go. And and I don't even know, and you guys may struggle with this as well, I don't even know how to describe World Burn in words, because I'm not sure if words can describe it, because it's an experience. I mean, and when you say life-changing experience, people attach that to a lot of stuff. I went on a fishing trip and caught more fish than I ever caught. It was a life-changing. No, this is really a life-changing experience. But what it did for me, it changed the entire trajectory of my life. It really did, because after 20 years of ignoring it, I had to step into it.
Mm-hmm.
And even my first world burn, I spoke at my first world burn. Believe it or not, the chairperson of the conference, because I was so freaked out at my first world burn, he took me out of the hotel and we went down the street to have a cup of coffee. He understood I need to get outside just to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at a coffee shop down the street from the hotel, and Bob Nice, he was the chairperson of World Burn, a firefighter who was also burned as a kid. And we had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things in common. And I'm bawling, I'm crying in my coffee, and he let me bawl, and we talked, and we went back to the hotel. Now the next morning is the opening ceremony of World Burn, and the opening speaker canceled.
Mm.
And Bob's on stage. He's saying, our opening speaker canceled. He said, but I met a gentleman yesterday. And we had quite an amazing conversation. And his story is amazing. I think he would be a good person. And I said, he can't be talking about me. And he called me up on the stage. And all I remember is crying on stage. That's all I remember, was when I stepped on that stage and turned and looked at all of these burned people. I just cried through whatever the hell I said. And when I left World Burn, there were probably about a dozen organizations that asked me to come and speak, or Burn Camp, as Rachel knows, one of the Burn camps where she and I first connected, and I couldn't stop. This whole community, I had found my tribe, and I like to say what it has done for me. It has gifted me or blessed me to release the question why. Because all of my life I wondered why. Because I was a busy kid, but I wasn't bad. And I grew up on the east side of Detroit, where I had friends and associates that were gang members and killers, but it wasn't me. I did good in school. So was this somehow God's mistake? Was his aim off, and I was standing too close to somebody that it was meant for? And I had no frame of reference, because there was nobody I saw that had gone through this. And I thought once the bandages came off, I would be normal again, because I had broken my arm, kept a cast on my arm 8 weeks. When the cast came off, things got back, and I thought this was
goes
somehow
back to normal.
it's going to be the same thing, and it was not. But stumbling into the community and recognizing that I had something to offer, which still amazes me now as a professional speaker. It still amazes me that people want me to come and talk, and they actually listen to what I have to say. And I'm not over simplifying it, but part of my survival technique or strategy, I had to convince myself what happened to me wasn't a big deal. Because if I can convince myself it wasn't a big deal, anything that happened or anything that was said to me associated with it wouldn't be a big deal either. And then you fast forward. Now people are wanting me to share a story that there's a part of me, little Dennis in there, still said, this is really not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. And it's so important for me to focus on the impact that it has, to focus on why I'm doing it and who I'm doing it for, and take it off of me, and recognizing that the message flows through me, not from me.
Yeah.
But I recognize that it wasn't an accident. I call it an incident. And I recognize that I had to go through that. I had to live down in that suffering, because I couldn't have learned it in a book. No one could have told me. I couldn't have taken a class. I had to live in it, which allows me to connect with people in their suffering, because there too I have suffered. And you couldn't have convinced me the time would come that every day I give thanks for every scar on my body. And I'm so grateful for the pains that I still have. Some related to the burn, more of them now related to old age, but I'm very thankful for it, because that was my preparation for what I've been called to do today. So I call it an incident, and I stepped into my purpose. And people say, well, things happen for a reason, or God doesn't put more on you than you can bear. I say, God's got a lot of confidence in me.
I used to spend a lot of time, I think, in that why me. And I remember saying that once to a counselor, just saying, well, I just don't understand. And you brought up a good point. So, well, why not you, right? Like everybody has stuff that they go through. So why shouldn't, right, God handle this and give this to you? And that can be a difficult thing to like sit with, right? Of like, oh yeah, why not? Like anybody else, you know, what have I done to make this like not something I could handle? So, but it's a hard journey, and it's a hard like thing to process as somebody who's like going through it. And I think it, like you said, it takes a really long time to get past that why and be able to, whether it's finding purpose, right? In some cases, I think that helps you get over the why, but then also just dealing with, yeah, like why not me, and why not other things? And as I think that's helped me as I move on from that initial incident, right? When things happen or a bad thing happens in your life, like realizing and learning from, you know what, like this happened and bad things are going to happen, but why not have me handle this, right? So it's a hard realization to go through, though.
It really is, and my warped perception on that, and I say warped perception because that's what I've been told a number of times. But I personally, I don't believe there are good and bad situations. I said because it's really our perception. Because my trademark saying is problems are perceptions, not situations. And it's all in how you perceive it. Because I have the same scars that I had when I was hiding in the house. You know, this is the same injury that was the worst tragedy in my life. That today I went from hiding in the house to now I travel around the world standing on stages in front of thousands of people with the same scars. The thing that I'm giving thanks for today is the greatest blessing in my life. So the situation didn't change. What changed was my perception of it. And I don't tell people how to think, but I do believe that's something to consider. And would I trade it? I heard someone one time say that they met a lot of amazing people in the burn community, some of their best friends, but they lost their child in the fire. And they said, if I can have my child back, I'd get over missing all of y'all if I could just have my child back. And I get it. You know, I get it. And it's where we are in our journey. Where I'm at now is not where I've always been. And I don't want to oversimplify it. Where I am today, I would like to think I'm beyond this 5 years from now. You know, I really want to continue to grow. And do I struggle? I do still struggle with things, but I would have to believe I would struggle with things even if I wasn't burned. You know, my marriage. I have a friend who got burned as a kid. She got a boyfriend in high school. They went off to college. After college, they got married. They had 2 kids. They were married for 13 years. He left her. And she called me on the phone so upset. And her reasoning was, I knew he was going to leave me because of my burns. Now, it may not sound rational, but what that told me is all this time she's been waiting for him to leave. Because she was burned she was burned when they met. She was burned when they dated. She was burned when they got married. She was burned when they had 2 kids. She was burned during the 13-year marriage. But when he left, she was waiting for him to leave because, and I can relate to that because in my marriage, I could not believe that this woman would marry me unless she felt sorry for me. And as superficial as it sounds, as part of my success package, marriage was part of that. It had to be an unusually attractive woman. And I know that sounds shallow, but in my mind, the more beautiful my wife was, the less ugly I would be. And somehow it would balance out.
Yeah.
And that is so not fair. But I realized that 10 years after my divorce, because I was asked to facilitate a burn survivor couples retreat in Lake Tahoe. And I'm like, yeah, right. You know, I'm an expert because I'm divorced and haven't been in a relationship since. But they wanted me to do it, and I did it. But I went through that weekend listening to people and on this journey with different couples, and it really made me reflect on my own. And I looked at where I fell short in the relationship. And it's never all one person, but I could only own my stuff. And I look at all the things that I did. I say, man, as I got my independence back, I was fiercely protective of it. And whatever I could do, I wouldn't let anybody do it. And if my wife tried to do something for me, in my mind, what you're saying, I can't do it. And no one wants to be in a relationship where they don't feel needed. And if there was some place to go where I thought it was going to be a little difficult, I wouldn't let her go. Never said it, but I just didn't want to encounter stuff where she had to deal with it, because I grew up like that, with people saying things. I had to kind of chill the people that were with me, and we divorced, and I realized that, and I said, I need to call her and apologize. Now, this is a real sweet love story right here, so I really want you to get this part.
I want to hear it.
I needed to call her and apologize. Now, this is 10 years after my divorce. And does she even give a damn anymore, right? And it was New Year's Eve. And I said, I can't let this year go out without reaching out to her and apologizing. And I was scared. I'll be honest with you. I was visibly shaking, and my mouth was dry and my throat. But I needed to do this because the apology is not just for the person you're giving it to, but it's for you also. And I'm not responsible for how that person takes it. But if I need to apologize, we need to apologize. And I called her New Year's Eve, and she thought it was a booty call. It's like, I don't know why you're calling me on New Year's Eve, because we're not resurrecting anything. No, to hell with that all anxiety. No, it's not working, buddy. And as I began to explain to her, it's not a booty call, but I really need to talk to her about something, I'm bawling. I mean, and with her hearing me cry, she knows that I'm serious, that it's, and I'm bawling, and I just needed to apologize to her. And I told her some of the things that I realized, and all these years later, it may not make a difference to you, but I need to apologize to you. And then she starts sharing some things. Now she's crying, I'm crying. The ball is the apple is dropping in New York City. All of this stuff is going on. And we talked for a couple of hours on that phone, and we hung up. And I didn't know if it made a difference to her, because when people get divorced, you sometimes lose your identity. Because when I would run into her, I was no longer Dennis. I was her ex, right? But after that call, I ran into her a couple of months later, and she was with some people. And she said, I want you guys to meet my good friend Dennis, and we used to be married. And I was like, wow, it did make a difference. And it just touched me that not only that we became friends again, but just the power of communication, and how difficult it is for people. Sometimes it's just, I'm sorry. Sometimes it's as simple as I'm sorry, and she shared some things with me. She said how angry when we were married, how angry she would get with me, because when we be out and people would say derogatory things about me, she's ready to fight. But because it didn't allow her to fight. So then she'd get mad at me for not going to war, that she could help me. And I never knew she felt like that. And just that whole dynamic of, it's simple as asking you, what do you need? Because sometimes when we care about people, we do things without asking. Well, I know exactly what you need. What did you ask? Give you an example. When someone has death in the family, oh, we can't let them be by themselves. Well, maybe they want to be by themselves. Do you want to ask? And it's just an interesting dynamic. And just as we grow and we get older, and have honest dialogue with ourselves, and really take a look at ourselves, because that's the hardest part. Because the shift for me, I was skipping my happy butt through the airport, going somewhere, and I'm, always trying to sing. And these two guys were walking towards me, and they started making fun of me, how I look. And I was like, man, those guys just ruined my day. And I looked back at them, And they were at one of the restaurants in the airport looking at the menu in the window. And I thought about it. I said, wow, I don't know those guys. I may not ever see them again. Why does their opinion matter so much to me? They've moved on. They're looking at lunch now. And here I am. And that's when I realized, how dare I want people to accept me when I wasn't accepting where people are? How do I ask you to accept me by asking you to change? I said, no. I said, it begins with me accepting people where they are, how they feel about it, how they react to it, accepting that. And I had to begin to work on me, because it's not what people said. It's just that what they said reminded me of something negative I was already feeling about myself. It had nothing to do with other people. So I had to begin to put the work on me. I had to begin to work on me, which was the really hard work, because it stripped away all the excuses. It's easy to say that people are mean, people are cruel. But once it was me, it stripped away all the excuses, and I really had to begin to put the work in on me. You know, and that was a major turning point for me. Yeah.
Dennis, do you still, going back to your ex-wife, are you guys still friends today?
We are.
That's wonderful.
We are. And she tells me now that she's happy that I stepped into my purpose, and she doesn't think that it would have happened had we stayed together, because I'd have been so focused on her and the kids and all of that stuff. But she said she understands it now, because neither one of us understood it then. You know, I was getting married because it was part of a success package, and she was getting married because she was pulled in by my warm and loving way. Yeah, but it's very difficult to. It was very difficult for me to allow someone to love me when I wasn't loving myself.
Yeah.
So, it starts there.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And you know, especially as children, burn survivors, or young teenagers, and as you grow up, you're going through this change. And I used to do that all the time. Like my high school boyfriend, I was the same way. Like, how can someone love me when I look like this? But it starts with me loving myself. But I put all the blame on other people because I didn't want to put the blame on myself.
And we all tend to do that. You know, dealing with someone else's pain is easier than dealing with our own. And
sure is.
I think I was doing a young adult retreat up in Calgary, and one of the young adults, he said, I hate getting burned, that I got burned because my scars are so effing ugly. And he started crying. Now, he didn't need anyone to tell him it's okay, it's not that bad. He just needed to say it. And then someone else started crying. Someone else in the circle started crying. I started crying, because we all felt that. We all felt that. And it was the first time that I said the words that I didn't like what happened to me either. And I didn't like my scars, because I didn't know I could say it, because it was going to make somebody sad. And I didn't want to make anyone sad, but I had to own it. And being in that vulnerable place of that retreat allowed me to say it. But hell, that was almost 25 years after my burn, to even say it and to hear those words come out of my mouth. Man, it was incredibly painful hearing that, because I had been carrying the weight of it for so long. And I hope through formats like this, what you guys are doing with this podcast, and people being able to listen in the safety of their own home or their computer screen and hear these conversations that you guys are having, that maybe there are people that don't realize that they don't have to carry that weight. And it's okay not to like it. You know, it's okay to feel bad about it, but just not stay in that place. You know, so I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate what you guys are doing, not just having me as a guest on here, but what you guys are doing, because you could be doing something else. I mean, you really could. And I truly believe and know that the people you guys will influence and impact the most are people you'll never have any idea. Just know that you're doing the right thing. You're doing a good thing that's going to help somebody. And I just applaud you guys for doing it.
Well, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Dennis, but I know we're running up on time, but I do have, I do want you to talk a little bit about, before we end our podcast today. You're the executive director of the Georgia Firefighters Burn Foundation, which is absolutely wonderful. So you're doing some really beautiful good within your community as well. Can you tell us just a few, short snippets about what that foundation is like? What are some of the events? So if someone wants to get involved in your area and be a part of Team Dennis, how would they get involved?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, I took off my Georgia Firefighters Burn Foundation shirt because I didn't want to cross promote.
It's okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to take those liberties, but the Georgia Firefighters Burn Foundation was founded 40 years ago by a group of firefighters who raised some money to buy a wheelchair for a patient being discharged from the hospital, and then they raised some money for a wheelchair ramp. Then they raised more money and kept doing it, and more firefighters got involved, and it became a nonprofit that grew to be statewide, which is really the southeast region of the country now. But the mission is to partner with the fire service and burn care community to provide safety and prevention education, support medical facilities, and assist burn survivors in their journey of recovery. And that last part is really the meat of what we do, assist burn survivors in their journey of recovery. And we like to think the firefighters get people out of burning houses and cars and get them to the hospital, and then the hospital does an amazing job, because I think now the survival rate is like 95%. And the hospital does an amazing job. And we like to look at ourselves as that resource to hold a person's hand after discharge in their journey of recovery. And it's really for them to determine what that recovery looks like for them. We have a children's burn camp that's over 100 kids every year. That's a week-long residential camp. We have a young adult burn survivor retreat. We have burn survivor family weekend, where families come together. If anyone in the family has been burn injured, that they're eligible to come to the retreat, whether it's the child, the mother, the father, the grandparent, whoever, come to the retreat. So there's a continuum of care in a holistic way. And really, I guess what we do is allow people to give voice to how they feel and support them on their journey. And our website is www.gfbf.org. That's G, good friend, best friend.org. And we'd encourage people to log on there and just see some of the things that we're doing. And we like to look at ourselves as maybe a tentacle from the Phoenix Society. They're at the top, and we're one of those tentacles, because there are a lot of supports out there, and we're always looking for support. As a nonprofit, we do. And for me, being the executive director, I like to say all it means is I'm the one that has to go out and get lunch if it's inclement weather. That's all it means. I've got an office full of females. It's me and one other guy and several females. And hell, I was married to one person and end up in divorce. I don't know how the hell I'm managing this. But I also understand that they say happy wife, happy life. See, when I was married, I thought it was 50-50. Like, silly me, right? But I have an amazing team in Atlanta, and we really impact. And everyone on my staff, everyone I've hired based on their passion, not necessarily their skill set, because skills you can teach. Passion, you have to bring that. And we're there, and we're starting on our second 40 years to see about making it happen. And every year we sponsor at least a dozen people to attend World Burn. And I put that in the budget because I understand how important it is. I know the impact of the Phoenix Society. I know the experience of World Burn can be life-changing for burn survivors. So when I do the yearly budget, I budget for that on the front end, because I did want to end this podcast talking about World Burn. And all of this, my life and all of this, it really started with my introduction into the burn survivor community. And it started with attending my first World Burn Congress. And I didn't know I was going to change the trajectory of my life. But I heard the term burn survivor for the first time at World Burn. I was a burn victim up to that point. And it's so powerful, just the language that we use, to call myself a burn survivor, that's empowering. To call myself a burn, I may have been victimized by the incident, but having gotten through it and giving people space to grieve.
You talk about changing your mindset, right? So you're changing your mindset by calling yourself a survivor instead of a victim.
Yes. Yeah. Because what we hear, we process, and what we process, we become. So we got to be very careful what comes out of our mouth. You know,
Absolutely.
And I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. And if anyone's interested in attending World Burn, and I just encourage, if they're on the fence about it, just do it.
Go and do it. Well, you can do that by registering at worldburncongress.org, and we'll make sure that's in our show notes. Dennis, I know we're wrapping up here, but we have 2 final questions we ask all of our attendees that join us on the podcast. So my first question for you today is what self-care looks like for Dennis. So what does self-care look like for you? And how do you kind of, when you're having a bad day or just having one of those days, what do you do for yourself?
Well, I don't have bad days, first of all. Every day is a good day, and some days better than that. My grandfather, that was this mantra that he lived 89 years with. But I think for me, I think a mistake people make is they try to figure out, what worked. And I need to go on vacation, those kind of things. For me, it's laying on the couch for a couple of days, eating junk food, watching sports and old movies, and not even showering. And I can do that for about 2 days, and then I'm ready to, because I'm a very hyper. I'm full of energy. So, but 2 days, and when I do it, I have to force myself sometime, but that recharges my battery. I can watch an old movie, I can watch some sports. I don't have to think, I don't have to shower. I can eat junk food and not feel guilty about it, and that's how I recharge my battery. So when I don't have to put together a vacation that's going to happen 2 months from now. No, I can do it tomorrow. Or this weekend, just spend the weekend laying on the couch. And that's what works for me. That's what works for me.
That.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, before I do ask you our final question, I do just want to thank you for coming on the podcast and thank you for all the work you do, especially in the local community. I know we didn't really get a chance to talk about how both Amber and I kind of met you through our journeys. So we may have to have you on the podcast again so we can really dive into some of that.
If you get me on here again, I'll give you guys a chance to talk.
No.
We love having you, Dennis.
Yes, you make our podcast. Well, we did have some technical difficulties before we started.
That was my fault.
You did. Yes, sorry.
But it wasn't your fault, Dennis.
No, and I did try to blame Dennis for it, but it was my fault. But no, you make our jobs easy. As long as I can hear you and speak okay into the microphone, you made our job super easy today. But yeah, so our final question, it's our Phoenix Partner question, which today is sponsored by NFSA, the voice of the fire sprinkler industry, is, what advice would you give to a newly injured burn survivor?
What advice would I give to a newly injured burn survivor? Is to recognize that a burn survivor is not just the person physically injured, but it's everyone who's impacted. In my own journey, it was difficult what I went through, but it was even more difficult watching what it did to my family, because it just decimated my family. And that would be my advice, is just to notice it's not just you going through it. It's all of those people in your circle and in your life, they're going through it as well. And that would be not only for the burn person, but that would be for those people, because compassion fatigue is very real. Yes.
It certainly is. Well, Dennis, you have been nothing but a pleasure and a joy to have on this show. We thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, we hope to see you again very soon on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yes. Well, you guys keep doing what you're doing. I love you for it. For all those, on behalf of all those people like me who didn't have it, I can't thank you enough for doing it.
Thanks so much, Dennis.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.